This show is sponsored by Liquid IV. Like many people, I've come into the new year full of hopes and aspirations for the next 12 months. Maybe, like me, you're anxiously pacing the floor waiting for the F1 season to begin, or perhaps you've set yourself a more regular fitness goal, like running your first marathon or commuting to work by bike. Whatever you plan to do in 2025, come into your own way with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Powered by Live Hydroscience, Liquid IV helps you break the mould. Liquid IV is so easy and convenient to tear, pour and enjoy, and it comes in several fantastic flavours, like their new Hydration Multiplier Sugar-Free Raspberry Lemonade, and other winners like White Peach and Rainbow Sherbet. As a regular flyer, I know how easy it is to become dehydrated almost without knowing it when you're travelling. That's why I always take Liquid IV on overseas trips. It's more than just a drink, and it's scientifically formulated to hydrate better than water alone. Just one stick and 16 ounces of water provides 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, plus 8 essential vitamins and nutrients. And what's more, it's always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free and soy-free. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code THERACE at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code THERACE at liquidiv.com.
Ever feel like everything's getting more expensive? Groceries, rent, even breathing. And let's not forget car insurance. It just keeps creeping up. But here's the thing. Insurify makes one part of life easier. It's an insurance comparison site that finds real-time quotes from dozens of top insurers. Insurance companies compete for your business, driving down prices. It's like having a friend who knows all the best deals, but without the smug grin. You could save as much as $1,025 a year, and you might even cut your bill in half. The best part, it's all online. No phone calls, no spam, no nonsense. You could be covered in as little as 10 minutes, and with an excellent star rating on Trustpilot, saving feels less impossible. So why not give it a shot? Visit insurify.com and see how much you can save. That's insurify.com. Average potential savings based on initial quotes received by 183,234 customers seeking insurance through Insurify. Actual savings may vary depending on state of residence, individual circumstances, coverage selections, and insurance provider. Savings results are not guaranteed.
Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
Next on Metro's Nada Yada Island podcast.
I almost fainted when the 4 new bombshells arrived. 4 free Samsung Galaxy A16 5G phones at Metro.
No way.
And finding out the 4th line is free. Oh, things got heated.
That's wild. Join Metro and get 4 free Samsung 5G phones. Only at Metro.
Plus tax. Bring 4 numbers and an ID and sign up for any Metro Flex plan. Not available currently at T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and after the triumph of last year's attempt to predict how what proved to be perhaps the most volatile driver market in history, we're going to lay out how the grid could look in 12 months' time and what will be the key decisions that shape it. I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to gaze into the crystal ball are Scott Mitchell-Malm and John Noble. Well, Scott, we're back a year on from our last attempt to predict the driver market, still revelling in how well that went?
Yeah, I think so. Right for the wrong reasons, because I did say that Carlos Sainz wouldn't be a Ferrari driver in 2025. I just wish I'd known in advance that it would be Lewis Hamilton stealing his seat, because that would have been a great heads up on that story. I think it's a testament to how interesting the driver market ended up being in for the 2025 season, that we were, one, so wrong, and two, that the grid for this year is as interesting as it is, even though our predictions didn't come true. Because I think we actually ended up with quite a few interesting driver lineups. So let's see what we can come up with for 2026. Because whether we're right or wrong, I think we're going to have some fun trying to work out who ends up where.
As we said, there can always be a curveball that changes everything. And this is more about understanding the state of the market as it is now, because predictions, as I often say, are a mug's game. But John, you weren't implicated in last year's podcast, but this is a great illustration of how dangerous it can be to predict and extrapolate, given that you just get one move on the chessboard and it totally changes the landscape.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you kind of predicting a grid position, for example, when someone's been shuffled around in kind of the order, and then you get one position wrong, and then everything's wrong. So the tiniest of slip-ups means you look a complete idiot. So it's very, very easy to do. And it's also a movable feast, really, because what is true today may not be true tomorrow. What we think teams are thinking today, they can change their mind in 2 months' time. So it's all up in the air, but let's have a bit of fun.
Exactly, and driver managers were talking about how last year they'd never known anything like it, given how early it started and how many curveballs there were. So just one of those things. But we're going to go through all of the teams on the grid, discuss the state of play, what we expect to happen. So, Scott, we'll start off with Ferrari. Last year's troublemakers.
Because we did so well last year.
Exactly. Is there any reason to expect another shock there?
No, there's no reason to expect it. Lewis Hamilton has joined on a multi-year deal. Charles Leclerc did a new long-term deal before last season. And actually, it was Leclerc's long-term deal done about 12 months ago was part of, alongside Lando Norris renewing at McLaren, was part of a feeling that actually continuity was going to be the order of the day driver market-wise. And it felt like the sort of silly season fun had passed us by because teams were wedded to their drivers, like McLaren boss Zach Brown likes to say, like franchise drivers, a driver that is key to that organisation, marketable, knows it very well. And from a driver point of view, that kind of Hamilton at Mercedes had really kind of instilled a belief that you needed to be part of a project in something. Obviously, we'd seen it before, teams and drivers combining so effectively isn't exactly a new example. Michael Schumacher at Ferrari, even before that, just to use another high-profile one. But it felt like in the hybrid era as well, when there were so many things to get right, a lot of drivers had gone towards, right, we need to have the team built around me, and we need to know how to get every ounce of performance out of the organisation. That's the only way that you're going to have success. We've had a little bit of a shift now. Hamilton's obviously taken the plunge for this year. The only thing that will change kind of for 26 would be, I think it's a very, very slim chance of this happening, but Hamilton's season going so badly and him just deciding he can't do this anymore. He doesn't want to do this anymore. He's been nose bloodied too much by Charles Leclerc after his time with George Russell at Mercedes, and he just shockingly calls it quits himself. And Ferrari decides actually Ollie Behrman's had such a great first full season at Haas that they can move him across. I think it's going to take something like that to shake up the Ferrari lineup.
Yeah, I'd agree. Pretty unlikely that it won't be Hamilton and Leclerc. There is that possibility. John, any dissent on that? Would you agree it's a small possibility?
I think the possibility is there. I think it's unlikely. I think we've seen enough from Lewis's speed when things are working that he's still got it. You just look at Las Vegas. Sure, he had his bad moments. He doubted himself in Qatar, said, I'm not sure I'm fast enough anymore. But I think it was a bit kind of self-doubt came in. If he can get comfortable with that car, if he can deliver, even if he's being out-qualified slightly by Charles, if the results are there, it'll be fine. If he's completely lost at sea and makes that decision, it can happen. It's not impossible, but I don't see it. I think he's still got it in him to keep going. And 26, because things shake up so much, no driver is going to voluntarily want to walk away on a car that could potentially be winning the championship.
Excellent. Well, we can pencil in Leclerc and Hamilton in Ferrari and move on to potentially more volatile teams. John, Red Bull, almost always one of the key players, so it will be again this year. Do you see that Max Verstappen, Liam Lawson lineup carrying over into 2026?
This is a really difficult one because it's got all the potential for like endless scenarios that both could be out at the end of 25 and both could stay. On the Max front, obviously there's teams sniffing around him. Mercedes has been flirting. There's the rumours on Aston Martin, kind of longer term. So Max's future is always up in the air, and Red Bull admits itself it's got to deliver a car to keep him there. But I think ultimately it's that 26 prospect. His decision we made on if Red Bull looks competitive this year and all the indications are good for 26, then potentially there's no reason to stay. And the other thing is you're jumping into any decision you take to move in 26 won't be for 1 year. It'll be a long-term deal. And the danger is you jump ship, out of the frying pan into the fire and go somewhere potentially worse. So Max will be all about keeping his options open. And I think the best way to keep his options open is as long as it doesn't look like a disaster, you stay put into 26 and then you've got the flexibility. Is that a new Aston Martin? Is it a Mercedes? Could it be a Ferrari even? Who knows? So I think I'd put Max to stay. The big uncertainty is the second seat because I think Red Bull are a bit kind of behind the curve in what they need for a second driver. When you look at the quality of Hamilton, Leclerc at Ferrari, Russell Antonelli at Mercedes, Piastri, Norris at McLaren. If you want to gun for a Constructors' Championship, you need 2 A+ star drivers in there. And I think, Lawson's good, but it's going to take time to come up. He's inexperienced. It's not going to be an instant. He's not going to be, fighting wheel to wheel regularly with Max. And the question is, can he handle the pressure? Because if he falls away, if it is disappointing, Red Bull are a bit stuck, aren't they? There's no obvious candidate to slot in. All the good drivers seem locked in. Tsunoda, they've never been convinced about. I think in the end, are going to be really boring. I think both will end up staying, but only because there isn't an obvious A-star candidate to slot in at Red Bull. And potentially Liam Lawson, could do it, could make the change, be robust enough and hang on enough.
I think the Verstappen side of things is the big uncertainty there. It certainly has the biggest knock-on effect, because if they replace Lawson, it's purely because they've either suddenly got a lot of faith in one of their own juniors, which seems a bit unlikely, as John was outlining there. If they had that faith in someone like Tsunoda, he'd be in the car already. Or maybe they found someone else to just sort of plug in as a Perez-style stopgap. But I feel like they're moving away from wanting to do that again. So Lawson feels almost... This is going to bite me in the backside. Lawson feels almost guaranteed for 26 by default, because I always feel like they don't have anyone else. Whereas with Verstappen, because Verstappen leaving opens the door for Red Bull to have replacements as well. So it's the biggest problem from a Red Bull perspective, in that you lose your star driver, but it then moves the market around in a way that gives Red Bull more flexibility to replace them. I genuinely think for Red Bull, in terms of available drivers, finding a replacement for Lawson is going to be harder than finding a replacement for Verstappen. And I'm just saying that in terms of availability, not in terms of quality, because I think it's easier to replace a Lawson level driver than it is a Verstappen level driver. The reason I say this is because Verstappen's 2 best options to leave Red Bull, I think we've established, are Mercedes or Aston Martin. We can't rule out someone else coming in for him, but that looks like his main choice now. If he goes to Mercedes, then 99% likely George Russell's on the market. If he goes to Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso might be on the market. Now, and if you're looking from a Red Bull...
Or Lance Stroll.
If you're not going to take this conversation seriously, Ed, then we might as well end the podcast now.
Stating a fact.
I would say that if you're Red Bull and you're looking at the possibility of a Russell or Alonso coming in, because Verstappen has decided to leave, then that can be either a short or medium term solution for you, and that will soften the blow of losing a Verstappen. So Red Bull will have a little bit more flexibility there. It just comes down to where Verstappen's at, and it's I wonder with him how much of it is going to be pull factors from one of those teams, and how much of it is going to be a push factor from Red Bull's side, making him want to leave. Because if the trajectory is not good from a competitiveness point of view, because they haven't actually post Adrian Newey got on top of their car problems, and you have the spectre of the 2026 changes of Red Bull taking the massive leap of going on its own, there could be a big argument on that side for Verstappen to be better off looking elsewhere. So that I just think there's a huge amount of uncertainty over what he'll do, which is bizarre to say for a driver who has won 4 straight World Championships with this team and is under contract until the end of 2028.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. Well, you've both basically backed Lawson to still be there next year, so we can ink Lawson in. I guess this is the inflection point of the podcast, isn't it? Do we put Verstappen in the Red Bull column, or do we decide he's going to move? So,
I'll put him in. I think the gamble is too much to make a switch for 26, because you're much better if you're a driver that wants to win multiple more World Championships. Then you need to know from 2026 what is the best car to have, because there will be a trend, and with new regulation changes, someone's going to steal the march, someone's going to be ahead, and the top drivers are going to want to be in that car for 2027. So I think you're better off waiting to know than making a move based on some positivity and some noise and being sold a potential lie, basically. So I'm putting Max to stay.
Well, what do you want to go for, Scott?
I'm going to inject the glass half fullness of the podcast, because I'm going to say he's going to go. I think I'm really on a knife edge as to whether he will, but I I'm willing to stick my neck out and say that he will leave. Do I need to specify a team before we move on?
Not at this stage, but it's really tricky because I think the odds are slightly more in favour of him staying than going. But it feels more in the sort of 60-40 because, like you say, there could be some push factors as well. The Aston Martin project could appeal. So I think on that basis, we've got kind of this marginal call in favour of Verstappen. But perhaps if we'll put Verstappen in at Red Bull with Lawson staying on next year. But we're going to have to discuss probably two different versions, aren't we? Because there is a version where Verstappen goes. And if Verstappen goes, then who knows what Red Bull will do. They'd have to spend big money buying someone out of a contract, wouldn't they? So you start looking at Oscar Piastri as a possibility. They've pursued Lando Norris before, but McLaren would ask big money for those. It's a bit of a mess. There's even been the idea that Fernando Alonso could end up going in there if they need to make space for Verstappen. So yeah, we'll put Verstappen and Lawson staying at Red Bull, but we'll keep the Verstappen moves option open. I think there's a fork in the road here, and both ways could potentially come to pass. Before we talk about some of the other teams, just a quick word to say, I know many of you were disappointed not to be able to make it along to our live shows in London and Birmingham in January, so I'm delighted to say that a special edit of the London show is now available to purchase from Patreon, unless you're a Champions tier member, in which case it's automatically included in your membership. It's not the full show, as some parts were too visual for an audio release. Some bits we wanted to keep just for those in the room as well. But we think it's still a really fun listen that captures the essence of the event. Love you to check it out. If you want to do so, there's a link in the description and you can listen to our live shows.
Don't miss the first Marvel movie event of the year.
The country needs Captain America. You asked for me. Here I am.
On February 14th,
Get the suits ready.
experience a brave new world.
Let's go!
That's made for IMAX.
Stand by for proof of that.
You want me? Come and get me!
Captain America Brave New World. See it in IMAX February 14th. Get tickets now. Rated PG-13. This film may be inappropriate for children under 13.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. During tax season, your personal info travels to a lot of places. Between payroll, your tax consultant, and the IRS. If your W-2 gets exposed, that's just the ticket for identity thieves. That's why LifeLock monitors millions of data points every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it guaranteed or your money back. Don't let identity thieves take you for a ride. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed, for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
Okay, Scott, let's move on to Aston Martin now. We've had no change in the first two, but with an asterisk by Verstappen. So what about Aston Martin?
Logic would say that it stays the same, especially if we do think Verstappen stays where he is. But I just think that there's potential for a change for 2026. And I was willing to stick my neck out and say that Verstappen will leave Red Bull. And I'm willing to say here that it would be to Aston Martin. The question is on for which car. My gut feeling is that Lawrence will do what he can to give Lance a little bit more time, including the first year of the new rules when everything's meant to come together. And as we keep being told, when Aston Martin finally builds a mega front-running car, we'll see the best of Lance Stroll and he'll rise to the occasion. I can't see Lance being, given that's been the rationale the whole time, I can't see Lance being ejected before that opportunity's been given to him. So my starting point for the Aston lineup next year is Verstappen and Stroll.
Okay, well, what I've done now is I've created two little, because I'm noting down the lineups to go over them at the end. So I think we're going to have to commit to two versions here, just to hedge our bets.
Doesn't that defeat the whole object of the podcast?
Well, we'll have a primary. The primary is the Verstappen stays at Red Bull. That's the primary prediction.
Okay.
But
you are both welcome to revise your hedge betting, fence sitting stances from the previous part. And join me in this glorious world in which Verstappen moves and everything's more fun.
It's certainly the more fun world, but I've still think it could happen, but I'm slightly more in favour of Verstappen saying, which is a little bit awkward. But anyway, so we've got Verstappen in at Aston Martin. Just backfilling a bit, Scott. Who would you have at Red Bull if Verstappen's gone?
Well, I think because he would take Alonso's seat, I can see Red Bull taking Alonso as the stopgap because
okay.
Because I just think with the situation that they're in driver-wise and kind of readjusting their junior program situation, they've got a couple of drivers now that are really interesting prospects, Red Bull, but they're not ready for the top team. So you're looking at someone like Arvid Lindblad, or if Isaac Hadjar sort of comes good in racing bulls and lives up more to the kind of peaks that we've seen in junior categories, he could be an interesting prospect as well. But I just think that's a sort of 27, 28 kind of driver situation for Red Bull Racing. And in that situation, an Alonso carrot, that's basically the perfect situation for someone like Alonso being available, because it would be exactly the profile of driver that Red Bull needs, an absolute A-list driver that you can trust, but you don't need to worry about taking up a seat for the long term. It would be about the only team that I think Alonso would leave Aston and extend his F1 career for. And it would also bring everything not necessarily full circle, but it would draw a line under something that has been a little bit of a will they won't they in F1 for as long as I can remember. For how long have we been dealing with the odd quote emerging where Horner reveals a certain talk with Alonso on a certain date or something like that? I think there's been 3 or 4 times now through F1 history where Alonso and Red Bull could have happened. So yeah, why not happen for 2026? It's straightforward, and it would also potentially be the most likely way that someone like Aston Martin could facilitate that kind of move, that soften that element. You mentioned earlier, Ed, that to get Verstappen you need to buy him out at Red Bull unless he's got a clear exit. Maybe that can be facilitated by you could have this guy, you could have Alonso.
It would also just create a very logical addition to the Alonso story, wouldn't it? If he's shoved out of Aston Martin and goes to Red Bull at a point where potentially Aston Martin is the team that becomes preeminent and Red Bull goes into a bit of a dip, isn't it? So that'd be very, very standard almost. But yeah, that would be an elegant solution. And then it could open up the chance for Red Bull to go after somebody 27, 28 kind of time, couldn't it? In terms of, if a Norris is available or a Piastri, they're on long-term deals. Obviously, Leclerc's got a long-term deal with Ferrari, but who knows? So a lot can change through that rule change in terms of where you want to be, as John was alluding to earlier. I do think on the Verstappen thing, we should just throw in that the kind of outside chance curveball, which is the year off, the sabbatical approach, because that could be what reconciles what you were saying, John, with obviously you don't want to commit on 2026, but there could be a scenario where Verstappen thinks, I don't like the look of what I'm seeing at Red Bull and with the powertrain project. How about I just disentangle myself completely, become a free agent, do a bit of sports car racing in 2026, and then jump back in with whoever's looking best in 26 for 27. So that's a possibility, but we're not going to create a third pathway for our driver lineup predictions. So yeah, our primary has got Alonso and Stroll at Aston Martin. The Scott alternative has got Verstappen and Stroll. I'm
more than happy for there to be a podcast version and then a Scott version of the 26 predictions.
It just shows how much of an inflection point it is. And if you're a team like Aston Martin or Mercedes as well, who've pursued Verstappen, you'll be looking at that and thinking, this is possible. This is absolutely possible. But until it plays out, and I think the competitiveness of the Red Bull this year, plus the unseen progress or lack thereof, the power unit project are the two key things there, as well as maybe does Verstappen want to change after so long at Red Bull. So let's move on now to Mercedes, John. They've got Antonelli and George Russell. We know Russell's out of contract, so that's a potentially interesting one.
Yeah, I think this is perhaps the most open of the grid, I think, in terms of we can't predict how it's going to play out and which one of them or both of them are going to come on. There is endless options that you can slot in here. So if Russell is out of contract, and I think he could become the kind of centre point of the driver market because he's a race winner, very quick, he's available, and if someone wants somebody, commits early and goes for him, they could probably get him. So he could be in quite a good situation. in terms of bigging up his own money if Toto gets around to doing a new deal, seeing what else is around, and potentially, being used. Does Christian Horner, for example, if Liam Lawson isn't performing early on, they think that maybe they need, someone definitely stronger in that second car, knowing Russell's available. Do you just commit and go for Russell? Because that would annoy Toto massively and leave him with a potential hole to fill. And I think Christian would like nothing more than that. You get a confirmed race winner in the car. And it'd be quite fun having George and Max in the same team after what happened in Abu Dhabi last year. So that's potential movement there. And then Antonelli's obviously the big uncertainty, because the scale of his season coming up, I think, goes from being superstar, brilliant driver, winning races, and being the best thing F1's seen for years, to potentially someone who's come in a bit inexperienced, a lot of crashes, needs building, needs a bit of support, and could even be parked somewhere else if Mercedes don't see the progress. So I think his potential is two extremes, and he'll probably end up somewhere in the middle. And Toto's decision on what he does with Russell, for example, and if Max does become available and starts banging on other people's doors, does he then think, actually, Antonelli is the long-term future, so we'll kind of keep him and build him up and get him, and George is the one that makes way? Or is it a situation that Antonelli is struggling and they need to do something different, and then Max slots in there? So I see it. The potential's there for everything to change, but I'm going to be really boring again and say both are going to stay into 26.
I actually back that. I would say Mercedes doesn't change, because I don't think that, despite the door that was left open last year by Wolff, I just don't think Mercedes would be foolish enough to oust either Russell or Antonelli, one of their own, for the potential problems and expense that would be involved with getting Verstappen, and with the potential ceiling that you have with the drivers that you're going into 2025 with. One of the things that was so confusing last year with the open courting of Verstappen was that Wolff was basically setting Mercedes up to have to dump one of its own prospects. And in an ideal world, especially if you also take at face value the faith that Mercedes says it has in Russell and Antonelli, that means willingly dropping a world champion caliber driver. Now, when you've got an actual proven world champion on the market who might be interested in joining your team, look, I understand why that makes sense, but it's more than just the path of least resistance. In Antonelli, you have, according to Mercedes, a future superstar who'll win many titles if he has the car in the future. And in Russell, you've got a driver who really rose to the occasion in 2024. I think it's a different... I do think it is a different equation if you're judging Russell in the end of 2023, when he looked a little bit more wobbly against Hamilton. He hadn't quite smoothed out some of the rough edges that I think we were waiting for him to do. But he really stepped up more through 2024. And the way that he commanded that Las Vegas weekend towards the end of the year, I don't think a Russell of 22 or 23 would have done that. So I would just be surprised if Mercedes is willing to toss either of those drivers away, because it will have to. I'd also imagine, I would love to be in the situation when, because obviously Russell is effectively a Mercedes managed driver, that if Red Bull and Christian Horner wanted to make an early move, as John was suggesting, I would absolutely love it if the Toto had to handle those negotiations himself. That would be absolutely brilliant.
I would be very, very surprised with Mercedes if Antonelli gets abandoned, because I think they're going to back him to the hills. They've done that up to now, and I think it would have to be a catastrophe for them to shove him onto another team or anything. I think they really would. They really would only do that in extreme set of circumstances. I suppose the Russell one, as we talked about, if Red Bull sense they're going to lose Verstappen, let's say Verstappen early in the season says, oh, this is the fourth best car in the first few races, I'm not interested in next year, I'm going to make my way out of it, then it makes sense for Red Bull to try and get Russell, doesn't it? And I always remember you were in China last year, weren't you, John, when after the race we had the Toto Wolff session where he was talking about Max Verstappen, and then Christian Horner talked to us after, and there were questions about, Toto's courting courting Max again publicly, and Horner just throwing that, well, Russell's out of contract, so that's clearly just there in the back of his mind as an option as well.
He said at the end of last year that he did it again at the end of last year, saying that, Russell's a free agent and he'd be someone of interest. I mean, the indication I got when I spoke to Horner is that he's happy to use the fact that Russell's a free agent in as part of the sort of driver market warfare, but I didn't get the impression he was kind of super serious about exploring it properly. I feel like there might be a little bit of bad blood between Red Bull and Russell. I think Russell's pushed on a nerve a few times now with his conduct on track and off it around Verstappen, that maybe there's a little bit of needle between driver and organisation there.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised to see them trying to put Russell alongside Verstappen, because we know how cautious they've been about who they pair Verstappen with by eschewing Sainz. But if Verstappen goes, then Russell is the obvious one. I'd probably rather have Russell over Alonso. Alonso, ultimately, he's still performing at a high level, but age is ultimately somewhat against him. So, yeah, I would have thought if you're Mercedes, you're quite keen to get Russell tied up. And actually, if Antonelli starts the season pretty strongly, that probably helps Russell, because they'll think, yeah, this is the lineup we want. We'll get Russell in. We don't need. He's an insurance policy at worst, and at best, he's the lead driver with Antonelli coming up. So I think Antonelli and Russell as Mercedes, both in our prime and our alternative timeline for 2026, stay in place. So next up, we've got McLaren, Scott. See if there's going to be any change there?
I don't think so, but in much the same way as when I've been asked on this podcast if I think Piastri can fight for the title this year, I'm going to apply exactly the same caveat. Depends if Piastri makes a step in qualifying pace this year. Because if Piastri does, McLaren's got a really tricky situation to manage, because it will have two A-list drivers. It'll have two drivers capable of fighting for the championship. Two drivers that are very quick over one lap, have slightly different strengths, but just as Grand Prix drivers overall are both very high level. And that is something that's going to be hard for them to manage longer term. And if either driver gets any kind of indication that loyalties will be too split in a team like that, or indeed that it's just going in one specific direction. If Piastri feels, or the Piastri camp feels, that McLaren is just too moulded around Norris, or Norris and the Norris camp feel that McLaren's starting to shift towards Piastri because he's getting a bit of a foothold, that's when that would change. So I would say the McLaren lineup is the most likely to stay the same of any of the top teams alongside Ferrari, but it is probably the one that's most prone to a big curveball, like another team coming in and just going, we need an A-list driver, don't care what it takes, I need Norris or I need Piastri. So I'm going to go with them staying the same, but I'm going to acknowledge the possibility of a big twist.
Yeah, stranger things have happened. What do you reckon, John?
No, I think it'll stay the same. I don't see any reason for a change. I think even, Norris is under long-term contracts. I think it's likely Piastri's contract to be extended. It works. And you've got to think from Piastri's point of view, if he makes a step up and if they're fighting for wins, you don't want to leave a winning car to go to a slower car where potentially the results aren't going to be good anyway. And if you've got to have the belief in yourself that you can beat your teammate and you can push on. So I don't see any reason for change for next year, and I think even unlikely for 27.
It sums up why this is so tricky and volatile, because all of these drivers where there's that possibility something could happen, with the exception of Russell, they're basically all under contract, aren't they? Because Verstappen's got that contract to 28, so there's certain ways that can be got out of. You can always buy people out of contracts. There's all sorts of ways to do it, but there's a lot that would need to happen for these things to move. But yeah, I'd agree. McLaren most likely to stay the same, so we'll keep Norris and Piastri there.
You know what's smart? Enjoying a fresh gourmet meal at home that you didn't have to cook. Meet Factor, your loophole in the laws of mealtime. Chef-crafted meals delivered with a tap, ready in just 2 minutes. You know what's even smarter? Treating yourself without cheating your goals. Factor is dietitian approved, chef prepared, and you plated. Pretty smart, huh? Refresh your routine and eat smart with Factor. Learn more at factormeals.com.
Okay, let's move now into the second half of the grid. RB, John, obviously it's his own little ecosystem with Red Bull Racing.
Racing Bulls now.
Oh, yes, we call it Racing Bulls, don't we? Yes, sorry. But much better. Very disappointed that I didn't take the opportunity to go with RB. Yes, Racing Bulls, John.
Yeah, interesting one. Obviously, Yuki had his sights set on Red Bull. Didn't happen. So probably I think a bit frustrated by that. But Racing Bulls, still believe in him, still believe he can make the progress. But he has to make a decision. And also Honda, who support him, have to make a decision about where's his future best set. Honda obviously aren't with Racing Bulls next year. So, debatable if they want to commit to keeping their driver in a car that is, will be badged with a Ford Red Bull engine. I don't see any room opening up for him at Aston Martin, for example, when that Honda relationship kicks off. So I think the choices for Yuki will be, if he performs well, I think Racing Bulls would like to keep him from a driving perspective. He's got the experience and he keeps performing. But I think from his and Honda's perspective, the question will be, do you put him on the sidelines for 26 at Aston Martin as a third driver with a view to potentially getting in somewhere the following season? Or do you keep racing on at the way? My hunch is he'll end up staying just because there aren't many other logical options there. Obviously, some will depend on what happens at Lawson. Is there a scenario where Lawson doesn't perform, Red Bull decide, well, our only other option to see is Yuki, slots in at Red Bull, and he proves to be a brilliant sensation, and they manage to overcome all their doubts on him. That's one scenario, but I think he'll stay. And Hadjar, young driver coming in, again, a bit like Antonelli, we aren't really sure, how good he's going to be. I think he's got quite a lot of ground to make up. I think his temperament will need calming down a little bit. There'll probably be some incidents on the way, but I don't think the team would bring him on, look after him for a year and get rid of him after the first season. So I see Hadjar more certain to stay into next year. Yuki's the big question mark, but I think in the end, on all the probabilities and options and potentially where he could go, he's more likely to stay than not.
What do you reckon, Scott? I find Tsunoda very, very difficult because it feels like it's probably time for him to move out of the Red Bull world. But if Lawson tanks, Red Bull might feel they have to replace Lawson, and Tsunoda might be the last man standing in that equation if they don't want to go outside of things. But if Tsunoda does decide to leave and there's not that outside chance of the Red Bull promotion, then where does he wash up? It's a really weird position. He could end up. I don't think Honda's got much say in terms of what Aston Martin do. I can't see him being a race driver there. A reserve driver role there's possible, but he won't want to be on the sidelines, will he? So really, really tricky, this one.
It is, but there's a part of it that I don't think is tricky at all, and I actually deviate from the two of you. I don't think Tsunoda's at Racing Bulls next year. I don't think he's in the Red Bull family beyond this season. I'd go so far as to say I'd be very surprised if he stays. I think for 2026, I think Racing Bulls will be Hadjar and Arvid Lindblad. Red Bull thinks really, really highly of Lindblad. It has. You remember last year there was all of that hurrah around the exemption on the super license to be able to get Friday practice super license at the very least before you're 18, and obviously there's a lot of attention about it because there was the question mark over what Antonelli would do and blah blah blah. It was all about Red Bull and Lindblad because Lindblad's still only 17, but the plan is for him to do Friday FP1s and also have a super the license to be able to test for Red Bull this year. He's even, as we sit here and record this right now, he's going into what I think will be I think it might be the penultimate weekend of what used to be Toyota Racing Series, the Formula Regional Oceania now, I think. He's winning that. He's out there to get his super license points. If he wins that championship, he has a super license. And Red Bull are talking about him in a way that I don't think I've heard them talk about a driver like that for maybe even since Verstappen. There was a point when Marco in particular was talking really, really enthusiastically about Tsunoda, if you remember, around that when his F3 season was getting going and he was impressing in F2, but this is a bit more than that. So I think Lindblad will come in. I don't think Red Bull's got any real desire to keep Tsunoda. Horner's already strongly hinted that they probably need to let him go now because he's not going to get into the senior team. And I don't think that'll happen. We've already sort of said we think that Lawson will end up sort of sticking around there. So I don't see any room there. I don't think it'll be Tsunoda's choice. I think it'll be Red Bull saying, time's up, Honda's gone, we don't need to do this anymore. We want our young driver. But they've also said Racing Bulls needs to become much more of that kind of training ground again. So I think that will be the lineup for next year, Lindblad and Hadjar. And then I think, not to get too far ahead of myself, but I think Tsunoda has two options, both of which I think end up with him on the sidelines in 26, I'd imagine, but then with a view of getting back in the car for 27. I think the more likely thing is the Honda link facilitates some kind of role at Aston Martin in a non-driving capacity. And if I'm right and Verstappen goes there and then it's Lance Stroll, maybe Stroll gets moved aside and ironically Aston Martin end up with the driver lineup Red Bull never wanted, which was Verstappen and Tsunoda. But I also think there is a slim chance that Tsunoda ceases to be a Honda driver at some point over the next 18 months. And I think could end up in the Toyota program. And I think because Io Komatsu is a huge fan of Tsunoda and was interested in him for 2025. I could see Tsunoda ending up in a testing role at Haas and then slotting in at Haas whenever Behrman moves on from Haas and goes to Ferrari.
Well, if Behrman goes to Ferrari, I still think there's a bit to prove on that score, but certainly it's a possibility. Actually, in terms of Tsunoda, I agree with you that I do think he'll be out of Red Bull. So I get the casting vote on this one. So I'll go with the Hadjar Lindblad option on this one because I just think, Tsunoda's time probably in the Red Bull world. I almost feel like it's more likely he'll be the last man standing. He'll replace Lawson if they feel they have to replace him than be in a Racing Bulls car. So that's what I'm going with for that. And we can discuss a bit more where he might crop up in detail later. Let's talk about Alpine now. Another interesting team, Scott. Actually came on strong at the end of last season as well.
Do you want to pick the 26 lineup or do we have to pick what's going to be the end of the 25 lineup first?
Well, I think those two things are connected. So I'll let you interpret it how you so wish.
I would love for Jack Doohan to get a proper chance there. I think he's earned it. I think he's a good driver, but I just don't see why they'd have made the move that they have to get Franco Colapinto in from Williams if there wasn't a longer term plan to replace him. So fairly short and sweet on this one. I'd be surprised if it's not Colapinto in the car rather than Doohan for 26, certainly. So I would go with Pierre Gasly and Franco Colapinto for 26. And then I also would say there's at least a 50-50 chance of that lineup materialising at some point this year.
Perhaps even more so. What do you reckon, John?
Yeah, I agree. I think the way Colapinto's been signed, the way he's been, the photos of him and Flavio sat at desks at Enstone. Is there any other team? I know Flavio's not the team boss, but senior team figure, being promoted and pushed and part of the family as much as that with their third driver, with reserve driver. There's the commercial aspects to it as well. We know Argentina, South America, Williams benefited a lot from that, all the hype and the buzz. I think Liberty would love to have Colapinto racing as well. Huge interest. We've got the F1 exhibition going to Buenos Aires. There's a show run being planned. Everything's pointing towards Colapinto. And the pressure is on Doohan. I mean, it would be great if he'd be guaranteed the entire year, if he had the chance to prove himself. If there were some struggles, he was backed and, arm round shoulder and pushed on. But I think, unfortunately, the reality is, I think that the 26 lineup is pretty clear in Flavio's head. The question is, does that roll forwards at all? And I think Doohan, unfortunately, won't be given a second chance if the performance isn't super strong. I think it's not like, as you mentioned, Antonelli. If Antonelli has some wobbles, Total Mercedes will do all they can to protect him and bring him on and encourage him and give him the support to come through and battle through it. And they'll fight us media away saying, you need to make a change. And they'll go, no, he needs time. We'll give him time. We'll see through it. I don't think that'll happen at Alpine if Jack has any issues.
Excellent. So we're unanimous on Alpine with Gasly and Colapinto next year. How about Haas, John?
I think that won't change at all.
That's your motto. That's your
unfortunately,
on this podcast,
I wish I should have been here last year because it would have been much more fun when it all changed. But I think it's just the season when there is so much change on the F1 grid for 1 year, it invariably means there isn't much change the following. I think you go into these cycles of lots of change and no change. But Esteban Ocon, he sees Haas as a chance to, step his career up, be in a team where he feels he can make a difference and push on. Ao Komatsu loves him, sees youth on his side, a mixture of youth and experience, because he's been there. He's won a race for Alpine. He's out to prove a point. I can just see it working. And Behrman as well, part of the Ferrari family. Ao absolutely raves about him, says, he sees things from him he doesn't see from other drivers. So there will be progress. He needs to step up. He's not ready to race full time for Ferrari yet. There isn't a seat for him, but I think he's on that step, and that step will roll into next year. So I see both Ocon and Behrman being there in 26.
Any dissent from you, Scott?
No, I think that makes total sense. I think it could get a little bit feisty at times managing those drivers, but I don't see anything happening this year that makes it, untenable as a pairing. Maybe that'll come in the second season, but I think this would be at least 2 years together. But as I mentioned him earlier, I wouldn't be surprised if Tsunoda comes into the Haas fold in 2026. I just don't think he'd necessarily be a race driver straight away.
Yeah, the only asterisk against this is, let's say that small chance of Hamilton jacking it all in because Ferrari's not going well, which we don't think is going to happen, but we can't completely rule it out. That could trigger a Behrman into Ferrari and then make a space at Haas, which I do agree Tsunoda would be a very elegant fit for. Let's move on to Williams now, Scott.
Well, there shouldn't be any reason for a change, and Williams will desperately hope that there is no change, because this is a team that has been having an eye on 2026 and beyond for a very long time now, since James Vowles took charge. It's all been about building for the future, and installing Albon and Carlos Sainz as the drivers has all been about a load of potential that they want to cash in, and 26 is the first time that they can start to cash in on that. It will still take longer for them to make the changes and the progress that they really want to. But they've signed these drivers for 26 at the earliest, haven't they? It's not really about 2025. So I don't think anything will change. I think it will be the same. But Sainz, and to a slightly lesser extent Albon, are both going to be drivers where if there is some big curveball elsewhere, they could be in the sights of other teams should vacancies arise. And I think pretty much every team on the grid would consider at least one of the Williams drivers. And that's not they'd all consider Sainz or they'd all consider Albon. I think, some would consider one, some would consider the other, but across every team on the grid, both of those drivers would be a target.
Yeah, I think Albon Sainz still at Williams is an obvious thing to put into our list, John. Any disagreement on that?
Yeah, I mean, only a bizarre set of circumstances, I think. In terms of Williams has been pretty open that everything's about 26 and doesn't want to sacrifice what his potential can be for that season to chase short-term gains for 25. Carlos Sainz has clearly bought into that, so he's not expecting to rock up in Melbourne and get a Williams podium and be fighting for wins and enjoy what he had at Ferrari. It's going to be a tough season in the midfield. But if there is a scenario where, Williams does a Sauber, for example, and the current car isn't working, it's stuck at the back, it's not looking good, the warning bells are there for 26, then is there a scenario that Carlos thinks, maybe this isn't the place for me? Do I need to look elsewhere? And is there a need, say Red Bull, for example, if Verstappen's on his way out and Verstappen's kind of been a bit of a block there of Carlos going there, do they think actually maybe he is a good option to slot in? So, but I think it will depend on Williams' season going much, much worse than we all anticipate. I think if it's fighting in the midfield, making some progress, getting consistent points, maybe even battling for a podium towards the end of it, then I see no reason for Carlos to think this isn't good enough. But we don't know how this season's going to play out.
Okay, so we've got the same lineup for Williams. That's the 10 current teams. But of course, we've got a curveball, haven't we, Scott?
We haven't done Sauber, have we?
Oh no,
Ed, how can you forget your favourite team? This is ridiculous.
I breezed in my mind. I was thinking, yeah, Sauber's not going to change. So I just sort of shrugged my shoulders and thought, yeah, we've done that now. I was doing it in my head. It was a very interesting conversation we had. But yeah, John, Sauber, as you both quite rightly pointed out, Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto, they're under contract for next year. Can you see that changing?
No, because Nico knows what he's signed up for. Although I'm not sure, kind of when he agreed it, he was anticipating how bad things would be this season. Although there was a kind of a glimmer of hope towards the end of the year. It's pushing on. So he's brought in for the long-term project. He's signed to be an Audi driver. Audi doesn't happen until 2026, so I don't think he's looking at anywhere else. I don't think anyone else is going to look to buy him out of his contract. So I think he'll roll in. And Audi took ages to decide Audi took ages to decide their second driver, had numerous options.
I'm not sure decide's the word.
Well,
to trick any of them into signing, I think that was the thing that took a long time.
So I think having deliberated and debated and picked on Bortoleto in the end, doesn't make sense to do all that and then start scouting around and looking for a replacement unless he proves to be terrible, which I don't think he is. I think he's proved to be, pretty quick in everything he's done so far. You need to give him time. And Audi Sauber's problems aren't going to be drivers. They've got much bigger things to sort out. They need to get quicker on the track. Their current performance needs to improve. They need to recruit more staff. They need to improve facilities. They need to get the infrastructure sorted. They need to get focused on integrating the Audi engine. There's so much else to do. I think in terms of the list of priorities for Mattia Binotto and Jonathan Wheatley, drivers is probably like 111 out of 112.
Scott, would you agree with that?
Yes. They both signed to drive for Audi, and they were both signed by Audi effectively, rather than just the final limping year of the stake era, or whatever it is officially called. So it would be ludicrous after the saga that they embarked on over the last 12 months if they then changed the driver lineup after 1 year. So I'd be stunned if it isn't Hülkenberg and Bortoleto.
Yeah, I guess it would only be if Bortoleto absolutely tanks, which I can't really see happening, or if he's absolutely fantastic and they might be tempted to sell him to the highest bidder for some phenomenal sum of money that they can then invest in other things. But yeah, most likely it's going to stay the same, so we'll keep them there. Now we can move on to Cadillac, which is obviously a blank sheet, Scott. So this is a challenging one for you to fill. They are in a very odd position, aren't they, in terms of how they play the driver market, whether they're going to go outside F1, pick up what's available inside F1. So what do you see happening here?
I'm still convinced they'll have an American driver, because I think that was a big thing that when it was a Michael Andretti project, that was something that was desired. And I wonder if it's still going to be something that GM and Cadillac desire. Dan Tauris, who is the effective sort of leader of this overall project, not the F1 team itself, that's Graham Loudon, who is team principal, but Tauris is known to be a backer of Colton Herta, who in the Michael Andretti era was the all but guaranteed a seat, basically, as long as he has a super license. So I can't shake the feeling that one of the seats will go to Herta if they're available. And then it comes down to whether they are willing to go with two rookies or they want someone experienced. My head says Valtteri Bottas and Colton Herta would be a very sensible driver lineup. But I've had a thought over it's been bubbling away now for a few weeks. They've got a Ferrari engine deal, customer engine deal for the next few years. And slightly unexpectedly, the Ferrari junior Dino Beganovic has now suddenly popped onto Ferrari's radar more from an F1 perspective. I like Dino. I've spoken to him for a few years now and the people around him. He's always looked good rather than great, I would say. And I think he was sort of trending nowhere in Formula 3 because that was kind of going all right. He was with Prema. He won races, but title challenge never really materialised. And he had a really nasty 24 season that just kind of everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. He then compounded that with a nightmare in Macau where everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong when he was one of the favourites to win that at the end of the year. But he saved himself both in terms of like narrative around him and maybe also like a little bit with the Ferrari reputation with a really, really strong cameo at the end of the year in F2, which included a podium finish and I think a top 10 finish in all 4 starts. that he did. My understanding is he's done some simulator work, quite a lot of simulator work with Ferrari already this year. We know that he tested at the very end of the test that Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc did in the 23 car at Barcelona. And I think he's in line to do more tests with Ferrari this year and some Friday practice outings. He's almost, not by default, but he is the most senior Ferrari, like serious Ferrari protege now. He's almost ended up just about doing enough to get himself into being first in line for the next major Ferrari opportunities. He's not like an Ollie Behrman level driver or a Charles Leclerc level driver, but he's now coming really close to being in that position. If he nails his F1 auditions with Ferrari this year, we know that Ferrari loves putting in a young driver at a customer team, doesn't it? So I wouldn't rule out Bogdanovic in a Ferrari-powered Cadillac if all the stars align.
But it's not going to be Bogdanovic alongside, say, a Herta, because I don't think they're going to go all rookie. I can't see that one happening. There's obviously candidates. You mentioned Bottas. Sergio Perez is still floating around, so he's somebody you'd also have a look at as well. John, what do you reckon? Any other names you want to throw into that particular hat?
Yeah, I just wonder if this, they do the sensible thing. And the sensible thing in your first year of Formula One, knowing the challenge of new regulations and getting up to speed, isn't to put a rookie in. I think the rookie element, you need to look for, second year, third year or something. But I think to tick off the American driver box, you could potentially bring a Herta in as a third driver, does practice sessions and lots of testing and promo with you to building him up for a following season. I think Bottas is an obvious one. He's eager to get back. He's proved to be quick. I think there's a lot of untapped potential still there, despite the struggles he had at Sauber. And if you were after a experienced second driver who perhaps had a bit of commercial impact, good impact in kind of the Americas, Perez makes sense. I know he was tainted by Red Bull, a lot of doubt, but he's an experienced driver. If the car suits him, he can still do it. And I think if you're a team that's looking to build up and get better, there's nothing better having two super experienced drivers coming in, even if they're not, A star going to be up there fighting with Max Verstappen, but that car's not going to be fighting up there with Max Verstappen. So as a starting block, they're the most logical, sensible two to slot in from that experience perspective. But I like Scott's idea of Dino because I think that'd be quite exciting.
The one thing I would say just on putting in an American rookie, because I think you're looking at a Herta or maybe like Carl Kirkwood, for example, as the main contenders there, would be that it's a brand new set of regulations. So everybody's going to be learning new cars. And because it's such a big change, there's actually at least like a reasonable amount of testing for across January and February for next year going into the new season. So that doesn't take away from the fact that they would be rookies and you would still have the obvious benefit of having two experienced drivers. But I would rather put a rookie in for 26 than I would for a season like 25 when you've got 3 days that you need to share, like in Bahrain or something like that. Bottas-Perez partnership would basically be their version of trying to do something like Haas did when they came in, wouldn't it? And I've long since said that Bottas is effectively the perfect Andretti or Cadillac or whatever it would be called version of Romain Grosjean. So for me, it's Bottas. I would almost be pretty convinced that Bottas would take one of the seats because I think it's a no-brainer. But that's not based on... That seems to be what they're aiming for. That's just because that just seems logical.
I feel that if they want to go an American driver, they will go Herta. And if you want to go Herta, you've got to do it straight away. He turns 25 later this year in March, doesn't he? So he'll be 26 pretty much just after next year's season starts. So I think if you're going to go for him, you've got to commit, obviously assuming the super license situation is set. So I feel like Herta's more likely there. So what do we want to come down on? There's Bottas or Perez. I think it'll be one of those two. So I think, John, you're a bit more in favour of Perez.
We're all agreed on Bottas, aren't we? We're all agreed on Bottas.
Okay, we'll definitely. So we'll go Bottas and the second driver then. It's a question of is it Herta or is it somebody else? Yeah, I mean, I think if they go American, they have to go Herta straight away. John, you've argued for maybe deferring that. So where should we settle for the second seat?
Herta's probably more likely just because it's harder to justify an American team, American backing without committing to an American driver. So So you can put Herta down.
Yeah.
But even though I think it makes logical sense to get too experienced, to do what Haas did, get that experience in to build the foundations.
Yeah, I can certainly see the argument for that. But yeah, so okay, we'll go Herta and Bottas for Cadillac. We should throw in. There's a few other names around. Someone like Zhou Guanyu, obviously, who's the team principal of Cadillac. Graham Loudon has been involved with his manager. Is his manager. So there's a possibility there, and there has been talk about Zhou linking up with Ferrari as well, so that's also something that could, with a Ferrari customer engine, come to pass. But also they might have to hang fire a little bit and see what happens, because you never know if something does happen in the driver market unexpected. You never know what drivers might turn up and become available. So yeah, that's our lineup. Before we review our lineup, along with a nod to the Scott alternative, Scott, we've got a quick bit of any other business, because we often talk about the Race Members Club here, and click the link in the episode description or search for the race on Patreon to find out how to join and learn more about the many benefits. But you've got a story about how one of our regular question askers got more actively involved in our work to tell.
Yes, this is around the Australian Grand Prix and some track changes that are being made to the Albert Park circuit in Melbourne. I suspect the first thing we should do here is throw to the Race Members Club member Jack Aitken, not that Jack Aitken, but our Jack Aitken himself, to explain a little bit more.
G'day everyone, my name's Jack and I'm from Melbourne, Australia. When there's not a Grand Prix running, the Albert Park circuit is just a public road. I love riding my bike around the circuit in the lead up to the race as they assemble the barriers and grandstands. Recently I noticed that a brand new curb was being built on the outside of Turn 6. After Alex Albon and George Russell's recent accidents, a number of drivers had expressed safety concerns about this corner. Since they don't usually make track modifications in between races at this circuit, I thought this new curb was interesting.
So yeah, Jack sent me those photos, and I think he put them on social media as well. They picked up a lot of attention because even though Melbourne had that big change a couple of years ago, it was for 2022 with the big reprofiling, it's actually very unusual for there to be significant work done around the circuit. So basically this was the big crash site in the last couple of years. I think Alex Albon shunted there twice, hasn't he, in 23 and 24 on the exit of turn 6, and then obviously George Russell crashed there in the race, getting caught out by Fernando Alonso's slower than expected moving Aston Martin, and then came back into the middle of the circuit, the car resting on its side. So the two main concerns there was that the way that the curb was on the exit would unsettle the cars too aggressively, considering how low and stiff these cars are. And then also the barrier position on the outside was too arranged too awkwardly, so that it would naturally guide cars back onto the racing line, basically. So the two key changes that have been made are reprofiling that exit curb, so that instead of it rising on the edge, now it's basically the same shape and it goes on for longer. So that should create less of a destabilizing effect. And they've also tweaked the positioning and layout of the barriers on the exit to try and stop cars being spat back into the circuit. I think they're very sensible changes. They're very good changes. I'm pleased that Jack spotted the work being done, because it had slipped my mind that they were looking at doing stuff like that. And I think it's also good because doing the changes this way means that they have opted against reprofiling the corner itself, opening it up, moving the barrier on the inside. Because I think we all agree that's quite a cool corner now. It's very high speed. It's got that blind entry. It's a nice challenge. The drivers really liked it. And it's good to try and find a sensible compromise in the interim before you make wholesale changes to the corner again and water it down too much. So yeah, thanks Jack for bringing that to our attention. It would be really cool if more Club members can spot circuit changes around the world, or any other things that are bubbling away in F1, and we have a little roving web of would-be reporters basically feeding into us. I like the idea of that longer term.
Absolutely. Well, it's great the stuff we get from the Race Members Club, and definitely we encourage this sort of thing. So thanks very much, Jack Aitken. Right, let's just reflect on our driver lineup quickly to finish. We've got for 2026 our predictions: McLaren, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri; Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton; Red Bull, Max Verstappen, Liam Lawson; Mercedes, Kimi Antonelli, George Russell; Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso, Lance Stroll; Alpine, Pierre Gasly, Franco Colapinto; Haas, Ollie Behrman, Esteban Ocon; Racing Bulls, Isaac Hadjar, Arvid Lindblad; Williams, Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz; Sauber, Nico Hulkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto; and Cadillac, Valtteri Bottas and Colton Herta. And of course, on the alternative Scott timeline, we've got Verstappen at Aston Martin with Alonso taking his place at Red Bull. But I think from the discussion we've had, what's clear to me is there's a load of these potential little grenades that could go off. And they're all probably less likely to go off than they are to go off. But because even McLaren's got that little question mark, Ferrari with Hamilton, Red Bull with Verstappen, Mercedes with Russell's uncertainty, what are Aston Martin going to do? That means that cumulatively, there is the possibility of a big curveball that will render our predictions completely obsolete. But the main objective has been to set the lay of the land of the driver market as it is now, and who knows what will happen. Hopefully we'll have a better strike rate than we did last year, but who knows? I'm sure there's going to be plenty of news stories about that this year and plenty of talk about it on this podcast. So thanks very much to John and Scott. We're looking forward to the rest of the month with testing and launches, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
It's the final week of the transfer window, and that sound you can hear is David Ornstein's phone blowing up. I'm Ayo Akinwolere, and you can join me, David, and our esteemed reporters every day on the Athletic FC podcast, as we leave no stone unturned on picking every major deal.
You know, this is a major development, and let's see how it goes forward.
Don't miss a beat with the Athletic FC podcast. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.